I thought I would celebrate my sister Odessa's wedding and play the part of the good daughter. However, as soon as I entered the opulent site, I sensed something was wrong. Chandeliers glistened in the ballroom, and the aroma of pricey perfume and fresh flowers filled the air. Everything exuded luxury, with the exception of my position within it. A wedding planner greeted me at the check-in table with an unnaturally bright grin, but I felt my gut tighten when I saw the glimmer of worry in her eyes. I spotted it after she glanced at the seating chart sad. I had come to despise that look. "Oh, right here you are," she remarked, passing a tiny place card to me. "You're, seated over here." I scowled. "Excuse me?" She forced a second smile. "Your table is just outside the main reception area." I looked at the enormous seating map that was on display close by. The bride and groom were seated next to my parents, Harold and Vivian Hathaway. Every distant relative, plus one, and unknown visitor had a place in the ballroom. However, my name was missing. I felt a gradual heat in my chest. I looked at the planner once more. There must be a mistake. However, there was no error. There was a message. Just a friendly reminder. I didn't fit in. I looked around the room till I saw my mother, Vivian, cheering as she worried over my sister's dress while standing with Odessa. As always, Odessa looked radiant, loved, and lovely. She smirked and tilted her head in response to my gaze. I could tell everything from that sneer. I walked over while speaking softly. "Mom, can I talk to you for a second?" Vivian hardly looked at me. "Oh, darling, now's not the time. Can't you see we're busy?" With a firm voice, I pushed. "It'll only take a second." With a frustrated but compliant sigh, she moved aside. Odessa remained motionless, her grin widening. I remarked, "I just checked my seat." "It's in the hallway." Vivian hummed dismissively. "Well, we had to prioritize immediate family members at the main table, Sloan." I blinked. "Immediate family?" "I am immediate family." As though I had uttered something absurd, she laughed. "Oh, sweetheart, don't be so dramatic." At last, Odessa spoke, her tone brimming with phony pity. "Did they mess up your seat?" "Wow, that's unfortunate. You know how chaotic wedding planning can be. So many little details, things get overlooked." She was aware that this was no coincidence. She was fully aware of her actions. I looked back at my mom. "Mom, are you really okay with me sitting outside the reception hall, away from everyone?" Evidently worn out of the discussion, Vivian sighed once more. "Sloan, don't make a big deal out of this. It's Odessa's special day. Just be grateful you're here." "Thank you." The word pierced my throat like a sharp object. "Do you feel grateful for being considered an afterthought? Are you grateful for the dismissal?" Ignored. The first started to say something when Harold, my father, interrupted. He didn't even look at me when he said, "It's just seating, sweetheart." Let's not ruin the mood. That was it. That was his only statement. A fresh voice broke the tension. "That's an interesting arrangement." When I looked around, I saw Dominic's mother, Celeste, standing close by with a glass of champagne. Her expression was unreadable as her gaze shifted to Odessa and then back to me. Odessa tensed up a little, but my mother instantly put on her polite hostess persona. She forced a grin as she added, "Oh, Celeste, you know how tricky wedding planning can be." "We tried our best to accommodate everyone." Unpersuaded, Celeste hummed. She gazed at me for an excessive amount of time, as though she noticed something that none of my relatives were interested in. Odessa skillfully steered the discussion away by putting her arm through my mother's. "Mom, we should really check on the cake before the reception starts." I lost my job instantly. Around me, the ballroom was alive with music, laughter, and glass clinking. I wasn't really a part of the celebration. I ran my fingers over my name in exquisite script on the place card I was holding and glanced down at it. I then carefully placed it on a neighboring tray and turned to go. They didn't know me at all if they assumed I would just sit there and accept this. My fingers clenched around the hem of my dress as I leaned against the chilly wall of the dark hallway. Out of the grand ballroom, a world I was never really a part of, came the distant clinking of glasses and laughter. The seclusion wasn't brand new, but the humiliation? This time, it's sharper. An old wound was being cut open once more. This was no coincidence. They wished for me to feel insignificant. And they were successful, damn it. This was not the only time that my chest ached. It resulted from years of being the afterthought and the second choice. 3 years ago, when I realized I was invisible to them, was when my thoughts strayed. I spent the weekend at my parents' house, searching through my old bedroom. It was evident that I hadn't been there in a long time. My childhood books remained undisturbed, as dust accumulated in the corners. High school and college before I gave up were captured in the framed photos on the wall. I was merely spending time while my mother finished cooking another extravagant meal. I wasn't searching for anything specific. Naturally, for Odessa. Odessa was always at the center. Then I noticed it. A tiny leather notebook protruded from my mother's bedside table. I nearly forgot to open it. Nearly. But for some reason, I reached for it because of the manner it was hidden, as if it were significant and vital. There were pages and pages of meticulously documented notes, thoughts, and memories. Concerning Odessa, her birthdays, her accomplishments, her difficulties, she enjoyed her favorite foods, the names of her buddies since childhood, even a list of the presents she had adored, as well as the ones she pretended to like out of courtesy. I turned more pages, trying to find something. Anything pertaining to me. Nothing. Not even a reference. Not a single idea. No one mentioned her other daughter in any of the entries. I didn't seem to be there. I stood there with my hands hurting from holding the notebook so tightly. A lifetime of uncertainty was abruptly validated in ink. My mother hardly responded when she entered. "Oh, Sloane," she remarked in a light, carefree tone. "You've always been so independent. I never had to worry about you like I do, Odessa." As if that were meant to be a praise. As if the years of silent neglect would be erased by that. Not a single thought about me was worth writing down, even if she had written down everything about Odessa. That's when I realized, in this family, I had always been the only one. I was brought back to reality by the sound of laughter coming from the ballroom. Even now, the weight of that fucking notebook was pressing against my chest. I looked at the table I was given in the hallway, the pettiness, the disrespect, the message they wanted me to take away. They could remind me of my whereabouts if they chose to. I got the message. I took a deep breath and pulled myself away from the wall. Perhaps it was time for me to start acting like my family had already determined that I didn't belong. My thoughts were racing as I turned toward the ballroom, but I noticed him before I could enter. Dominic. Holding a glass of whiskey, he stood off to the side close to the bar. He wasn't drinking it, though. He wasn't looking around the room as casually as a man who had recently tied the knot with his true love. Instead, he focused his gaze on someone, me. He let out a long, slow breath, then pushed off the counter and came over to me. Sloane. There was something behind the evenness of his voice. I arched an eyebrow. Dominic. We were silent for a time. Around us, the wedding progressed. People are celebrating, laughing, and drinking. A party advanced as its base deteriorated gradually underneath it. After shifting and twirling the whiskey glass in his hand, Dominic turned to look at Odessa over his shoulder. His jaw tensed as he turned back to face me. Once more, there it was. That hesitancy, that uncertainty. "Sloane," he began, speaking more softly. "I know we haven't talked much, but can I ask you something?" I cocked my head. "That depends. Is this polite wedding conversation? Or something else?" He was not smiling. Didn't act at all. Something changed within me. Dominic rubbed his temple and moaned, as if he already regretted this. "Does your sister ever talk about me differently? When I'm not around, it was there." That one query, that instant when whatever delusion Odessa had been giving him began to give way to reality. I thought about lying for a moment, perhaps out of a misguided sense of security. Perhaps because it was risky to reveal the truth in such a situation. Then I recalled, I have been assigned a seat. Odessa's smile. My mother was fired, and the true nature of Odessa. I looked at his tumbler of whiskey. "You should probably take a sip of that first." After tensing up, Dominic raised the glass to his lips and drank it all. "Dominic," I uttered slowly. "I don't think you know Odessa as well as you think you do." He clenched his jaw. I was afraid of that. We were separated by a dense, oppressive silence. "She's been acting different," he finally acknowledged, his voice now softer and tinged with something akin to annoyance. "Controlling. There are things she doesn't want me to see." My stomach turned over. Since there were, of course. Another voice broke the tension before I could reply. Darling, in a cool, collected voice. Heavenly. Dominic's mom. Her face was unreadable as she approached us, but her eyes? Sharp. Being aware. She is the new mother-in-law of Odessa. The only lady had greater authority than she did in this room. Celeste came to a halt before Dominic, her eyes briefly darting to me before focusing on him. I think you ought to see this, she replied with ease. She then extended her phone. With hesitation, Dominic scrolled down. His expression changed from bewilderment to awareness. A far, far worse thing. Dominic's hands gripped the phone more tightly as he silently scrolled and looked at the screen. His expression changed first bewilderment, then insight, and finally, something much worse. His fingers whitened where he held the glass, yet I saw his mouth tighten and his breathing steady and slow. Everything changed because of whatever was on that screen. Odessa has always maintained her appearance with caution and attention to detail. However, she had erred. Her mother-in-law Celeste had discovered it. Dominic's voice was measured and quiet, but there was a distinct edge of something sharp underneath it. "What is this?" he asked. Celeste's face was unreadable when she took a tiny drink of her champagne. "Your future wife doesn't simply despise me, Dominic," she replied with ease. "She's been planning to control you since day one." As if the floor beneath him had just cracked open, Dominic wavered a little. I said nothing at all. I didn't have my moment. He owned this. I merely observed. He watched the delusion of his ideal marriage crumble before his very eyes. He saw the gradual disintegration of his well-constructed faith in Odessa. Odessa had always been a skilled liar. However, even she was unable to talk her way out of this. Even as the wedding was in progress, the foundation was already collapsing behind closed doors. A few minutes later, they led us into a private lounge. The air was thick. There is something electric and thick in the air, something hazardous. At the heart of it all stood Odessa, looking or acting perfectly composed. Our mother, Vivienne, was already talking, filling in the gaps as they appeared. "This is all just a misunderstanding," she added, an anxious smile forced on her face. "Emotions are high, it's a wedding after all. Let's avoid any potential family tension." Celeste interrupted her. "Family tension?" she asked sharply. "Vivian, this isn't tension. This is a revelation." Odessa crossed her arms over her costly gown and laughed dryly. "Seriously? You dragged us in here for this?" Her voice was brimming with artificial sweetness as she turned to Dominic. "Baby, tell me you don't actually believe this nonsense." Dominic remained silent. He didn't even give her a glance. "Ever the guardian," Vivian grabbed for his arm. "Dominic, sweetheart," she sang. "You have to understand, Odessa has been under a lot of stress. Planning a wedding is exhausting. People say things they don't mean." Celeste laughed. Funny, because she seemed to mean every word when she talked about controlling him. Odessa's mouth clenched. However, before she could retaliate, my father, Harold, eventually said something. "Vivian, stop." There was silence in the words. However, they hit the ground like a bullet. The whole room fell silent. As though startled by the interruption, Vivian turned and blinked. A man like Harold seldom raised his voice. No male stepped up to help, but this evening, something changed tonight. He replied, "You've protected Odessa her entire life," in a voice that carried a weight I couldn't quite identify. And look what it's turned her into. A liar, a manipulator, a lady who believed that marriage was just a contract to protect her future. With a look of real disbelief on her face, Odessa gasped, "Dad, you're taking her side?" Harold didn't give her a glance. He turned to face me instead. And when he said, "Sloane has been right all along," I lost my ability to breathe. I could hear the words. My throat tightened with each breath. In my life, for the first time, I was my father's choice. Vivian flinched, her mouth opening as if to object, as if she wanted to scold him for having the audacity to oppose Odessa. Harold's voice, however, was decisive. With a fake giggle, Vivian shook her head as if there had been a miscommunication. "Harold, don't be ridiculous," Dominic interrupted her. "Odessa is a liar." His tone was unpolished. It was as if he had only recently realized that he had been sleeping next to an unfamiliar person. Odessa tensed. "Excuse me? If you keep covering for her?" I whispered quietly. You will lose more than just me, Mom. This was the first time Vivian stumbled. Odessa went into a frenzy. Desperation began to seep into her voice, sharpening it. You're all turning against me because of her! Celeste exhaled slowly and sipped her drink before striking the last blow. We're turning against you because we finally see you for what you are. Odessa recoiled physically. She shuddered as she breathed. Her gaze flitted from one person to another, looking for anyone to support her. She had been in charge all along. So far, the most deadly kind of animal is one that is injured. Odessa, too? She was not going to pass away quietly. The private lounge's air was oppressive, heavy with tension that felt like it would burst at any second. Standing rigid in the middle, Odessa's breath was shallow, and her fingers were holding her gown's fabric so firmly that the seams were straining. She was aware that she was losing control. Our mother, Vivian, spoke softly but frantically as she held her daughter's arm. Odessa, stop. Odessa, however, was unable to stop, refused to stop. Dominic, across the room, had yet to speak. Any accusation was overshadowed by his silence, a burden bearing down on Odessa's meticulously constructed universe. I noticed the uncertainty in his eyes as I looked at him, the man who had just made a lifelong commitment to my sister, beyond a reasonable doubt. Something colder, disgust. I suppressed the glimmer of satisfaction that ignited in my chest. This was not the end of it. Not quite yet. With a short exhale, Odessa turned to face me, her eyes narrowing. You think you're so smart, don't you? There was a tremble beneath her steady, controlled voice. I looked her in the eye. I don't have to think, Odessa. I know. Although she curled her lips, it wasn't a smile. Something darker was involved. More fragile. She spat. You've always been envious of me. I nearly laughed at the ridiculousness and predictability of the claim. Nearly. I cocked my head instead. Evenly, I asked. Jealous? Of what? I pointed to the room. To Dominic. To Celeste. To our own parents. Look around, Odessa. She blinked. Her breath caught. You're the one no one sees anymore. She tightened her jaw. I went for the kill after that, I remarked. You played your game well, in a controlled tone. But you forgot one thing. Odessa took a deep breath. I know who you really are, she winced. Though slight, it was present. Vivian took a deep breath. I wasn't bluffing, and she knew it. I took a step forward and spoke in a quiet but firm voice. I knew about the money, the texts, the things you've said about your own husband. I gave Dominic a quick look. The things you've said about his family. Dominic tensed. Odessa's face lost its hue. Then, in her life, for the first time, our mother begged me to do this. With her hands shaking and her eyes wide, Vivian turned. Sloane, she said in a whisper. She's still your sister. You don't have to do this. Silence for a beat. And for a little moment, for a split second, I paused. Not because I was sympathetic to Odessa, but since this was the first time my mother had ever looked at me in this way. She acted as if she needed my help, as if she was scared. However, the hesitancy was brief, because I knew Odessa wouldn't hesitate if the roles were reversed. And when she lost her temper, she demonstrated it. You're all turning against me because of her. Sharp and rough, her voice cracked. At her sides, her hands shook. She's always been bitter, always hated me. Her breathing was erratic. Under the ballroom lights, her face was pallid. She scanned the room, searching for someone, anybody, to be her companion. No one did, for the first time in her life. As though hearing the truth for the first time, Vivian let out a quiet gasp. Odessa staggered backward. A dawn of realization she was losing. She was aware of it. With her breath coming in short spurts, Odessa stood motionless. In a desperate attempt to find a companion, she scanned the room. No one did, for the first time in her life. In startled silence, the guests looked. With their hands up, several mumbled. Others looked at each other, attempting to comprehend what they were seeing. Her staunchest supporter, Vivian, remained silent. Odessa's gaze raced from face to face while her well-groomed nails pressed into her palms. She found herself in a corner, captured. However, Odessa Hathaway was not a lady who gave up easily. She forced a hollow, bitter laugh and straightened her shoulders. She said sarcastically, You all think you're better than me, in an uneven voice? Just wait. None of you will be anything without me. Nobody responded. She received no corrections from anyone. Nobody hurried to comfort her. Her smirk wavered. Odessa was alone for the first time in her life. She turned to face me, her eyes blazing with rage, her hands shaking. "This is all your fault," she spit out. "You've always been jealous of me. It was there." The same old charge. However, it failed to land this time, because I didn't care for the first time. I didn't fall for it. I refrained from arguing. I refused to give in to her demands. I just said, "No, Odessa, this isn't my fault," while glancing at her. She winced. "This is who you've always been." Her breath caught. I moved forward, speaking quietly but firmly. "You manipulate. You lie. You engage in constant deception. And when things go wrong, you blame everyone but yourself." As though hearing the truth for the first time, Vivian let out a quiet gasp. Odessa gave a fierce shake of her head. "No! That's not Mom. Tell her she's wrong." But Vivian remained motionless. She merely gazed. That silence was worse than any insult, in Odessa's opinion. Her panic grew. She realized she had lost too late as she staggered back. Broken and desperate, she lowered her voice to a whisper. "Mom?" With her eyes divided between the daughter she had always disregarded and the one she had always safeguarded, Vivian paused, her lips parted. I had a fleeting impression that she might pick me. Old habits, however, are hard to break. A trembling breath escaped Vivian's lips. Odessa! Odessa, like a child seeking comfort, seized the moment by grabbing her hand and pressing it to her chest. "Mom, you know me. You know I love Dominic. I would never—" She stopped talking, because Dominic's hand was holding something. There was a pile of documents on the floor. The top is stapled. His face was unreadable. He held on tightly. Odessa stopped. "What? What is that?" Celeste took a step forward, her face piercing. "Go on, Dominic," she uttered with ease. "Read it." Dominic's mouth tightened. Then he began speaking in an uncanny, quiet voice. Odessa Hathaway filed an inquiry with a divorce attorney. He breathed deeply. 1 month before the wedding, there was a strong collective gasp among the remaining people in the ballroom. It was worse than even I had anticipated. Dominic, however, continued. He said, "You were planning to leave me," with slow, methodical, and incisive words. "The second you got access to my money." In his palms, the paper shook a little. His voice, however, remained steady. Odessa's face lost its hue. "That's not." Celeste laughed softly, unimpressed. "Oh, sweetheart, don't even try." She tilted her head. "That's a legal document. You know, the kind that doesn't lie." Odessa lost her confidence. She could no longer control the room. Like sand, it slipped through her fingers. Dominic approached slowly. "Was anything ever real, Odessa?" His tone was unpolished. Not upset, not even let down. "I'm just worn out. Did you ever love me? Or was I just another accessory for you to show off?" Odessa's mouth trembled. She was desperate for someone to believe her, so her eyes flew across the room, looking and begging. Then, seemingly out of instinct for survival, she turned to face me. "You," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "You did this. This is all your fault." I looked her in the eye, not flinching. "No, Odessa," I spoke steadily. "This is your fault." Her breath caught. Her eyes were filled with tears. Not for Odessa. Not for me. For what she permitted to occur. For Odessa's transformation. However, it was too late. I no longer waited for her approval. I never required it. I walked over to the door. Not a showy speech, no second look, just a final, silent choice. I turned to leave. The cool night air flooded my lungs as I entered the hefty ballroom doors. Sharp, cleaning. Additionally, I've never in my life, I sensed it. Liberty. A week has passed since the wedding. A week has passed since I left, leaving them all standing there in shock, unable to speak, and uncertain of what to do in my place. The fallout was swift. I went through my phone, looking through the missed calls and unread messages. They were mostly from Vivian. A few expressed regret. A few were defensive. However, it was obvious that Vivian Hathaway had no idea how to lose. She had devoted her life to covering up Odessa's errors and acting as though nothing was as terrible as it appeared. This could not be smoothed over for the first time. Odessa, meanwhile, remained quiet. No posts on social media, have no mysterious captions. There are no meticulously crafted delusions of perfection. Like a fallen queen, she vanished from history, and thus from public view. Without me, the family group chat continued to be lively, full of inside jokes and updates. I should have been offended. I waited for it to ring twice before responding. Vivian's voice sounded tentative and shaky. Sloan. I know I've made mistakes. She spoke as if it were that easy. I remained silent. She gave a shaky breath. I don't know how to fix this. I reclined on my couch and gazed up at the ceiling. Nothing needed to be fixed. Not all wounds heal. Some people shouldn't. I didn't say that, though. I remained silent. She waited as if she was expecting me to give her a script that would explain how to make this all disappear. However, I wouldn't. I was unable to. After a while, she understood. She whispered, I just wanted you to know, before continuing. The line then stopped working. I received another mail later that evening. This isn't a voicemail. Not a request. A request. Supper. A silent, tacit ceasefire. For the first time, I thought about refusing. Not because I was angry. Not with bitterness. However, I no longer required their approval. I sat there contemplating my choice while looking at the screen. Additionally, I've never in my life. I came to a realization. It was no longer about them picking me. This has to do with my self-choice. Still processing the message, I strolled about my apartment. Supper. This was an opportunity to sit opposite them once more. A silent, tacit ceasefire. I paused close to the bookcase by my window, stroking the ancient framed pictures with my fingers. A picture from years ago of Christmas. Odessa in the spotlight is as stunning as ever. With a hand on her shoulder, Vivienne was by her side, and me like an afterthought, on the edge of the frame. After staring at it for a while, I put it down. Furthermore, I never picked it up again. Rather, I moved in the direction of the window and inhaled the silence of the night. I could see the metropolis in front of me, vast and brimming with opportunities, and I felt it for the first time. Liberty. Let me leave you with some crucial information before we wrap up this story. Family isn't about blood, if that's one thing I've learned. Respect is at issue. It's about being aware of your value. It's about not begging to sit at a table that wasn't intended for you. I thought I had to earn affection for far too long. That if I put forth enough effort, kept quiet enough, made enough sacrifices, they would eventually notice me. They would eventually pick me. However, what is the reality? The strongest thing you can do, the best thing you can do, sometimes, is walk away. Not all stories require resolution. Apologies don't always make wounds go away, and that's all right. Are you looking for actual healing, actual power? You have to make your own decision. So allow me to ask you, have you ever had to leave someone or anything to save your peace? Have you ever come to the conclusion that staying would be more expensive than ever leaving? If this tale struck a chord with you, leave a 1 in the comments section. Or let me know where you're viewing from. I enjoy hearing about your adventures and tales. And if you're looking for more stories like this, unvarnished, honest, and full of lessons that we can all learn, press the subscribe button because, believe me, there will be more. Additionally, keep in mind, it's not selfish to choose yourself. It is a matter of survival.